Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the guitarist, writer, producer. It is the one and only Lenny Kaye, who's now got a new book that has just come out in the autumn of 2021, titled Lightning Striking. This is subtitled 10 Transformative Moments in Rock and Roll, as he goes around various cities that had a major musical moment in their life. It's a fantastic book, and I'm not just saying that just because I've read it and also I've just interviewed him, but it is an absolutely stunning book, and it's really well written by somebody who's obviously a writer. And Lenny Kaye, just for those who may be wondering, he was with Patti Smith on her early albums and part of that whole punk scene, CBGB's Max's Kansas City, and also worked with such people as R.E.M, James, and also Suzanne Vega and her first two albums. He was the producer, and this is the interview, which is all very interesting because he was in London at the time, and that's not that interesting though. But I began by talking about his kind of memory of working with Suzanne Vega and those early albums, and you'll get the gist. Basically, there was a radio station that they went to during the making of that first ever album in 1985 to talk about it, and they just had a break from the studio and were doing a bit of an interview with Suzanne, playing a few songs from the album which we had yet to hear. And I'm slightly fascinated with that whole period in Suzanne Vega. So we start talking about that before getting on to the book. Anyway, just enjoy. It's fun. And Lenny's just an amazing character.
I can't. I mean, I remember recording Suzanne's album, but I don't remember if there was a radio recording or not. But I mean, what a wonderful record, right?
Yes. Well, this. I'll tell you, because it's like you and Suzanne have just kind of left the recording studio just to go to this radio station, which is called WBAI-FM, New York City.
Okay.
On the 19th of February, and you're just there, and you're just obviously still recording bits of it and doing the vocals and sort of trying to work out, which.
I remember WBAI quite well, and actually now I do remember it. Now that you mention it, it was probably the most progressive radio station in New York City, which is remarkable.
Yes, absolutely. And you spend sort of basically 60 minutes in the studio. She plays about 4 tracks acoustically. You chat about it and you talk about it. And I just thought it's really interesting. If you ever get a chance, do check it out, because it'll make you smile.
I would like to hear it. I mean, recording Suzanne was one of the highlights of my life. What a wonderful artist! Such a beautiful eye for lyrics, and the way she played guitar. And I always think that the culture called for Suzanne at that moment in time. It was a time of kind of larger than life characters, Cyndi Lauper, Twisted Sister, bands made for the spectacularism of MTV. And so sometimes I think the culture really wanted somebody to bring things back to an intimate level. It's not a million miles away from the kind of reactive evolutions that I talk about in Lightning Striking. When things get to a certain point, you want to see what's on the other side of it. And, surely Suzanne's album, reflected that. And if it was February 1985, that was really in the sweet spot of when we were working on that record.
Yes, you were often talking about having to go back and do her vocals one more time, and she was saying, "Oh no, I can't do it one more time."
Well,
and
Suzanne had a thing. She said, "I said, she would go out there and sing, and I'd say, okay, great, could you do it again?" And she says, "Oh, I was just singing. I didn't realize we were doing vocals." And I'm thinking, is there a difference? But a beautiful bell-like voice, and just a really wonderful, wonderful artist.
And did you, it was the thing about the book as well, and as well as that moment, you seem to have a great ability to be in the right place at the right time, because you were talking about culturally in the mid-'80s, we'd had Cyndi Lauper, we'd had Madonna, Then we had the glam rock, and you mentioned Twisted Sister, and I did an interview last week with JJ French, so there was this going on.
Wow.
And then this young singer-songwriter's appearing. She's playing a few of these kind of folk clubs in front of a few hundred people. And you obviously kind of picked up that in this bombastic period, and New York as well, as you know, has been, well, you lived it, so you would know the sort of drug scene, the kind of the period where it was kind of very poor. Everybody's like struggling, but rent is cheap, but everyone's dying of heroin overdose. And then this folk singer comes along, and you think, this is what we need, which obviously in hindsight is true. But at the time, did you, what made you sort of...
It was funny. I was called in there by Nancy Jeffries, who had signed Suzanne to A&M Records, or was interested in signing Suzanne. And her manager and my co-producer, because nobody was listening to folk music at the time, tried to kind of spin her in a folk rock direction. What Nancy Jeffries, who discovered her for A&M, wanted was a sense of the wider world for Suzanne without changing her, without making her more predictable in a certain way. By a weird synchronous thing, I was very much deeply involved in listening to Appalachian folk music at the time. I was working at Elektra Records doing these box sets of their catalog, one of which was called Oh Love Is Teasing, which had artists like Jean Ritchie and Susan Reed and Peggy Seeger, who were doing the music of the Appalachians. It was essentially folk music doing songs that were brought over 2 centuries before from England, Barbara Allen and, the child ballads. So I was kind of really in that world, but of course I have the other foot in the world where I like rock and roll turned up to 11. So it was kind of nice to go down there and meet Suzanne and just see what she was about. I remember after I saw her for the first time, I wasn't aware of this folk scene in the West Village that she was involved in, but I went there and I was really charmed by it. It seemed like all of a sudden this was personal. This was somebody singing one-on-one to someone else. And I found that very inspirational.
Yes. And it must be to sort of capture an artist who was like, oh, we might sell 30,000, we might do a couple of dates, to suddenly, a few years later, headlining Glastonbury Festival on the Friday night and seeing those 2 albums just develop. You must have felt...
Suzanne was developing at a very rapid rate. I always used to make a promise to myself that I would only do 1 album with an artist, because if I did a really good job, they would get all my moves, and then to expand and evolve, they would need another mirror to take them to a different place. But between the first and the second record, Suzanne had assembled a band with a drummer and a bass player, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole concept, the whole context had changed. And so I could come in and do basically what I did best with Suzanne, which is work with her personally, encourage her to take chances to become herself, essentially, which I believe is the job of any producer, that you want the artist to become as much of themselves as they can and open the doors so whatever the next album that comes down has a sense of evolution of it's not, it's kind of out of nowhere. Yes. And it was amazing to watch Suzanne grow into this, from a folk singer playing to 20 people on McDougal Street to headlining Glastonbury. It was quite a wild ride, and she's still performing and doing incredibly beautiful works. She re-recorded a bunch of her earlier stuff in different contexts, and just really a marvelous performer that I feel so privileged to have been able to work with.
Yes, it was definitely a moment which, yes, captures beautifully. Now, going to your book, which is has been quite the page turner. Now, putting this together, I mean, I guess everyone's going to come at it from a different angle. So one of the interesting things, because the chapters I've sort of gone straight through and read and sort of realised the depth is the one on sort of London, New York, and then Liverpool. That's the kind of general gist of it. So sorry if I've blown it, not going from
Oh, no,
eight.
no, no. You're geographically oriented. Of course, the two English chapters and the one about the hometown.
Yes, that's right. Did you find especially the one on London, were the chapters that you wrote, how was it, the ones that you kind of could experience and you knew what it felt like to be there and knowing some of the people, to the chapters on the cities that you obviously wouldn't have been walking those streets and hadn't played some of those or known some of the players and musicians? Was there quite a difference in how you had to approach this particular publication?
I mean, since it's about music and perception of music, whether I was actually there or present, I probably play a larger eyewitness role in those chapters, especially in the New York chapter where I am a participant. But also, to me, most music you experience outside of its context as it travels. And I was as interested to see how, say, the San Francisco music that I listened to from afar and then traveled to San Francisco evolved. I
Mm.
mean, all of these scenes seem to have their place within the larger growth of rock and roll in the same way that we measure the Jurassic period from the Devonian, from the the Precambrian, the great archaeological levels of of the earth growing. So when I looked at rock and roll from the perspective of the year 2014, which is when I started thinking about this book, I could see that there were definitely strata of of effluvium, I guess is the word, where things would pile up, and then there would be a change. A climate change would be probably a good analogy of how the music evolved almost reactively, and how did this happen, and where did it happen in a time when change was pretty much space and time, that you couldn't hit a note on a computer and be in San Francisco and see the Grateful Dead at the Avalon,
No.
or the Fillmore. You had to be there and see how it reacted to you as this little scene became a larger scene that actually changed the way rock and roll was perceived, played, and understood. Um, it was very much, like going on tour. You
Yes.
go to a city and you meet the people there. You start in London, and then maybe go over to Paris, and there's a different atmosphere in how you approach the people, and then you wind up in Japan somewhere. But I don't know. It seemed to be a narrative structure that would encompass the history of rock and roll without having to be too spread out to tell the story of every person who influenced the music. It was very much a story of the third dimension as it moves into the fourth dimension, and
Yeah.
of course
Well,
becomes
what
the fifth
you
dimension.
yes, and what you've obviously would know and experience is that the UK is very tiny, isn't it? It's a tiny little place, and you can put it in your back pocket. With America, it's so big. So,
Totally.
having done so many interviews with kind of American bands, I sort of realised that geographically, it's so kind of every place is almost isolated, isn't it? You get the Athens, Georgia scene, you
Yeah.
get sort of Boston scene, you get New York, you get San Francisco, and then talking to lots of bands who were somewhere in between, which I can't remember, but they would say, "Oh yeah, when we had to go to a gig, we had to drive 7 hours," and I felt embarrassed because I thought, God, sometimes
You'd be on
I would
the
say, God, that's like 2 hours, I'm not going to bother with that. And, these people have gone 7 hours driving all day through through the deserts to get to see the Clash or the Smiths or somebody like that. So that's kind of, so that's kind of an interesting thing with America, is that, that nothing is connected, whereas in the UK, everything is slightly, because we're so small.
And which is why when punk rock landed in the UK, it kind of spread like wildfire, where still in America, once the concept of punk was kind of defined and invented, it took a long while for it to seep out of the metropolitan areas.
Yes.
There was New York, there was Los Angeles, San Francisco, and then you slowly made inroads into the rest of the country.
Yeah. And did you sort of find during the book, because I've sort of realized, and you obviously would realize this more, is that most bands have a 5-year narrative, don't they? A zeitgeist moment. You have the honeymoon phase of about 12 months. And in this country, you get a single, if you've got John Peel to play it, who was this DJ that we all loved, he would give you that kind of next step up, and then a John Peel session at the Maida Vale Studios, 4 tracks, even bigger step up, and you'd started to tour around the country in your little transit van. First album, things going well. Second album, tricky. Third album, just forget it. And did you find doing this with the cities, there was a sort of, there was that period that started there, it was going well, and now it's not going to be lasted. Did that kind of come up?
It's kind of the classic thing where this amorphous bundle of energy becomes a thing, and usually by the second year is when people start realizing it's a thing. It has a personality and a definition, and then as it becomes more and more defined and moves out into the world, it becomes hardened. And even though there will be great records and great performers coming out of that, it's predictable. And when something gets too predictable, it starts to move into the realm of cliche and stereotype. And then it's time to change the channel. And I believe it is about 5 years, but I also believe that that's a good lifeline for any but the most immortal of bands.
Yes.
I disagree a little bit, because I think the third album is the charm. The first one, you're really figuring it out, even though you have a lot of songs that have made you popular. The second one is usually a reaction in some way to the first one, so you're out of balance. But the third one, you understand the studio, you understand how to work in the studio, you understand who you are. And I always think the third album is the one where, you make your most definitive statement. Fourth album, you're continuing that. And by the fifth or sixth, it's probably time to make room for you've understood yourself too well.
Yes, and you're probably doing a jazz fusion, medley. It's probably going to go. It's probably you've gone off
for the covers album.
Yes,
I mean, one of the great things with Patti is that we had our 4 or 5 year run in the 70s with 4 albums that I think really told our story from beginning to end. And then she left to Detroit and kind of moved into another musical sphere with her husband, Fred Smith. And then when she returned to, public performance in the mid-90s after Fred's unfortunate passing, we had a whole new lifeline to explore in the albums we've done after that. Maybe there's 4 or 5 original ones. I've lost count, but they have a different texture and tone and way of understanding our music. And by that time, you've amassed a sense of who you are and how to present yourself in a way that you can just continue doing it. I mean, I look over at Patti these days and I see the same performer who I've witnessed for half a century, and yet she understands how to deliver the message and the passion of our music in a way that's very special. I find that in myself too when I'm playing.
Yes.
There's a certain sense of experience and confidence and an ability to reveal that to yourself and the audience at the same time.
Yeah, because I mean, it's kind of interesting what you said, but bizarrely in your life and one of your major experiences in the 80s, that theory didn't quite work with Suzanne, did it? Because the first album, is kind of solid gold, then it's like the record label go, brilliant, let's get you in the studio. What's your, where's your, material? And it's like, I haven't got any. So that was the tricky one. And the third album is even more tricky because, the personnel changes. So sometimes it kind of that works, and sometimes it
I
doesn't
mean,
work.
every artist has their own arc. I really appreciate Suzanne's post-me records because they're more experimental. They take more chances. They explore different textures and sounds. From a person that was just pretty much an acoustic finger-pick guitar player, she really has explored the outer edges of her music to an amazing extent. And I appreciate her adventurism, her daring, and her sense to not settle for what she did for the last record. I believe Suzanne is actually an artist whose work has become more expansive over the years as she's been able to move deeper within herself.
Yes, well, anybody who I've spoke to who's managed to sort of continue a career in music has had to do so much to keep doing it, and I just
You have to refresh it, otherwise why do it? I mean, there's a lot of songs, a lot of albums in the world, and if you don't have something specific to say in each album, why churn them out?
This is true. This is very true.
You,
So just briefly, so Lenny, going back to the book, you mentioned earlier that you started this in 2014. Was this kind of one of those light bulb moments, or had it been sort of on your radar for some period of time?
I had been thinking about writing a book for a long time. My previous book was about the crooners of the early 1930s, Russ Columbo, Bing Crosby, a topic that I feel most people were bewildered by why I was into this. But I really found a lot of personal education in seeing how this music became popular after the invention of the microphone, and people were allowed to sing less stridently, and how the music metamorphs into what we would know, in the years pre-rock and roll, pre even the thought of the R&B that would turn into rock and roll.
Yes.
I really enjoyed that. But I've been thinking about doing some writing, and as always, a topic is important. I didn't want to do a memoir. I'm not that interested in myself. But I did want to do something that reflected my own involvement in the music, with the music as primary. I wanted to make myself a minor character while I was there, kind of an observer. But I also wanted to celebrate this music that has nourished and made me who I am today. And it seemed very, very right to kind of tell the evolutionary history of rock and roll in a way that I didn't think had been told before, which was through its flashpoints, through those locuses of energy that changed and moved the music forward or backwards, depending on what your tastes are. But and looking back over the course of the music from my perspective here in the second decade of the 21st century, I could see that these were kind of mile markers to the music, along the path of what the music was and would become. And so I set out. I thought of it as a tour itinerary.
Yes.
I'm going on tour, so instead of going to here and there, I'm going to start in Memphis. I'm going to get in my time machine and go to Memphis in '54 and see how Memphis got to '54, because that's an important part of these years. It's not just I'm starting on January 1st. How did '54 happen? What happened after it? Then New Orleans. Let's just go down to Mississippi, down to New Orleans, and then up to Philadelphia, the Teen Idols. They seemed very demarcated to me, and of course, knowing that the English invasion came along and totally rendered what came before that obsolete. That all of a sudden there was a new way, an exciting way of making music, and those things happened soon when punk rock whatever punk rock is, came along, it was definitely a demarcation in the movement of the music. And I just followed it along till, kind of rock's glorious, who knows what.
Yes.
It's
Well, no,
it's kind of weird conclusion in a way.
and I would imagine as a writer, being able to get the structure somewhere sort of sketched out in your mind, then gave you the sort of like, rather than having total freedom, but actually thinking this is quite specific, I can really focus and nail each one. So did you do it chronologically as well when you wrote the book?
I started with the third. I thought the Philadelphia chapter would be the easiest to write. Well, I figured out my voice. Voice is important when writing.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the research, I knew that the Memphis chapter with Elvis and the founding fathers of rock and roll would be difficult. I believe, can't remember whether once the book had found a home here in White Rabbit Books, then I set about. I think I did the New Orleans chapter next because, in a way, it was the one I knew the least about. I mean, I knew kind of the highlights, but I'd
Yes.
never delved deeply into how New Orleans came to be and how its rhythm started in the 1850s with Louis Marie Gottschalk, the great Creole pianist.
Yes.
Quite a nut, and they all are. And then I think I moved to Memphis, and then I started writing chronologically.
Yes.
Starting with Liverpool, and then kind of expanding the story from there.
And did it
So,
take a while to find your voice? Because there was a writer I spoke to recently. There's people like Nick Kent, but there's another American writer called Joel Selvine.
I know Joel, yes, from the West
And
Coast.
and his latest book that I read, I mean, he writes almost like a detective. The sentences are short, they're very snappy. It's like just one line,
Well,
full stop.
I'm
You could
not
imagine
sure
him with his
problem.
cigar. Did you
Right.
did you take a while to get that voice in your?
Well, I mean, I've been writing for a long time. I mean, actually, I've been a music journalist, critic, writer, whatever you call it, since the tail of the 60s. So I kind of know how to find me, some of it you kind of move this way because of the demands of the article or the liner notes, or how serious you have to be, or how flighty you can be, or how stoned you can be. But I knew how to write. I just wanted to make sure that, especially in the first chapter I wrote, that I was able to synthesize a lot of information, a lot of research, but not get bogged down in it academically. I wanted to make the book readable,
Mm-hmm.
and fun in a certain way, while and insightful without without burdening it with tons of footnotes and sidebars explaining this or that. I wanted to make it enjoyable to read in the same way that rock and roll is enjoyable to listen to. And once I kind of got the handle on the first chapter I wrote, then everything seemed to fall into place. But it was a very difficult book to write. I mean, I probably only did if I had got 250 words a page, I was happy with that day. Sometimes I get 2 pages, because I'm dealing with blocks of information. There's a lot of information on there, but I really needed to distill it so it felt friendly and it felt somewhat poetic, and I don't know. I mean, I now that I see it as a book, it's not just a collection of sentences. I'm really pleased because it's dare I say it's readable. It moves along. It has a narrative arc. It makes a couple jokes when, in fact, now that I've forgotten I wrote the jokes, when I look at the book, I say, "Oh my God, that's pretty funny." You praise that.
I can make people
But
laugh.
I'm really happy with the way it came out. I really wanted to tell the story of the music I loved through my own prism. And like I said, I didn't want to make it didn't want to overload it toward me, but I was there. I did see Jimi Hendrix at the Symphony Theater in Newark the day after Martin Luther King's assassination. I did go to Golden Gate Park to the funeral for Chocolate George, coming down from the acid of the night before in the Summer of Love. I did see the Stooges and the MC5, and I did live through CBGB and on and on and on. And also, I heard the music. I wasn't in a LA hair metal band, but there were some songs I really thought were excellent pop songs, despite the crazy lifestyle, but maybe that's how those songs became. I really enjoyed the time travel through the, it's not the only places I would have liked to visit. There's so many great scenes. I really regret not spending more psychic time in Kingston because I love reggae music, but I thought that would be too weighty a topic. I couldn't contain that within a chapter.
Yes.
I'd wanted to go to Manchester in the 90s and to take ecstasy in the hacienda. But I had to make sure that I didn't make the trip too long, especially for myself, or the book too long, as it turns out.
And I'm sort of guessing that when you mentioned about going, Kingston, at least you sort of felt more of an ownership with most of the places that you picked, especially the American ones, where did it feel a little bit like, God, that could be really tricky going to another country and then trying to sort of have some sort of authority or ownership on that particular place?
I do love reggae music, and I've spent a lot of time within its world, but I wasn't there when Kool Herc was inventing hip hop and breakbeat up in the Bronx. I would have been kind of a tourist, and all of these scenes influenced who I became as a musician and an appreciator of music. So I have to say, I had to rein the book in and make it so it reflected me. I didn't want it to be universal. I am, in the end, a rock and roller. I am a product of my time and space. I was 17 when I saw the Beatles on television for the first time, and that changed my perspective on how to perform in a musical combination. I grew up, alongside rock and roll. I do believe that.
Yes,
what I say in the introduction.
Because you were probably
it's been a parallel life to me.
Yes, and I was going to say you're roughly the same age as David Bowie and Lemmy, and I always remember when they said, their musical influence, and they both said Little Richard, and then they, ran off the other characters, but it was always Little Richard. But then I realized they were there from the birth, and you've been there from the birth virtually, without arguing the point too much.
It's an accident, would I have perceived it all differently had I been born in 1983? One never knows, do one? But
no.
Again, my growth spurt was parallel with rock and roll's growth spurt. I was able to experience it as a really young kid, as a weird phenomenon that everybody, all the older kids were listening to, and then I became one of those older kids, and now I'm one of those oldest kids.
The wise one. Just one question on the Jimi Hendrix gig that you saw the night after Martin Luther died. I'd read that he just played, was it one song like Machine Gun, and then just put his guitar down and went. Now, I wasn't there, and that's sketchy.
I don't know. I was there. I've read several accounts of that night. One, he played the guitar like he never played it before. I'm sorry. I was there halfway up into the audience. He did not want to be. He kept doing this thing, looking at his watch, just pissed, looking at a sea of white hippies who really didn't seem to care that the leader of Black America had just been assassinated. They wanted to see him smash his guitar. And so when he did it, he just did, you want it? He just looked and then walked off the stage. all I can say is maybe somebody 2 rows down saw it differently, but I just saw him play and be disgusted by the whole spectacle and feel the weight of his race as he would increasingly. I mean, Jimmy was never accepted by the Black community for reasons that escape me. But then, those were people were taking sides, and it was sad, but because especially since he believed in a universal music, he believed in a music beyond races, a rainbow-colored music, and he represented it probably more than anybody of his era.
Absolutely. Well, Lenny, look, Alex, I think she's behind you. Look at that, it's like panto. But look, thank you ever so much. And thank you ever so much for this amazing book. It has been brilliant. And I have to say, it's probably going to be book of the year, isn't it? It's been great. And it's kind of basically
you're God's ears, but I really enjoyed, writing it. I'm glad that people are reading it now. I can't actually believe it's out. I never thought that, wow, is this book really going to happen? And so I'm just very excited, and thank you for your time and energy. And, here's to it. Keep the faith, and the faith will always keep you.
Well, look, that's beautiful. Take care. Thanks a lot, and have a great evening and a couple of days in London. And Thanksgiving. Thanks, Alex. There you go. That is the end of the interview. Vaguely, Alex is the PR person in them who helped set all that up. Anyway, that was me in conversation with Lenny Kaye, whose book, Lightning Striking, 10 Transformative Moments in Rock and Roll, is out and about, available from all good bookshops and also online. This is on White Rabbit Publishing. 528 pages. It's quality writing. It really is. So do check it out. And if you're thinking, what should I get for Christmas? That is definitely worth it. If you want to contact me for some nice but random reason, no, not that random, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, do C86 Show. Also, all these interviews have been archived. Lucky you. You can find those on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Just do C86 Show. Anyway, look, have a great week. Stay safe.